So you're thinking about moving to Fort Worth. Nah, they don't really talk like that. Trust me, I definitely understand if you are trying to figure out if this is the best place for you. And in today's video, we're gonna cover 7 reasons you may not wanna move to Funky Town. My name is Mark with the Living Here in Dallas team. And every single day, my team and I get emails, calls, and texts from people just like you who are looking to make that move to the Dallas Metroplex. You know, I moved my family down to Dallas in 2015. So whether you're moving in 9 days or 90 days, just give us a call, shoot us a text, or send us an email, and we'd be happy to make the smooth move down to the Lone Star State. Now, if you're just starting your research before you move, then you've come to the right place. I'm gonna be breaking down some of the things you need to be aware of before you move to Fort Worth, and we're gonna get into it right now. Now, I know how daunting moving to a new city can be. You know, there's a lot to consider, like what areas are the best, what the school districts are like, housing affordability, et cetera, et cetera. And what I found is, you know, people who are considering moving to Fort Worth mostly hear all about the good things. But for me, I think it's important for people to not only consider the positive aspects, but to also know some of the not so good things that are going on. And if any of these reasons surprise you, you know, drop a comment below. So let's start with the most obvious reason you might not want to move to Fort Worth, and that is going to be the weather. You know, on average, the temperatures in the summer gets to be about 96 degrees, and we typically have more than 20 days of 100-degree temps. And what's bad about this is experts are predicting that we're gonna see more of these extreme heat days in Fort Worth in the future. You know, one of the negative things resulting from these extreme temperatures is there's more heat-related illnesses. You know, from 2021 to 2022, there was a 115% increase in the number of heat-related illnesses. You know, we're seeing longer stretches in the summer where there is no rain at all, which is really gonna lead us to more, you know, conservation alerts in all these cities. And the crazy thing is a lot of people don't even follow these conservation laws and rules. So that's something that you want to consider before you move to Fort Worth. And we can't even just say it's the heat anymore. Over the last few years, we've been experiencing some extremely cold winter. And that's just something that we're not really used to here in Texas. You know, when the grid failed a few years ago and there was no power at all, caused people's pipe to freeze, me being one of them, which made the water in the pipes expand and damaged all that copper. And so when everything unfroze, people were experiencing massive floods in their houses, losing all their belongings. It was just a disaster. That's why I'm such a big fan of all the new PEX plumbing in some of these newer homes. It's definitely something that will prevent any of those situations from happening, because we're gonna continue to see these cold winters and they're not going away. We're also on the south end of what's considered Tornado Alley. So we do get your occasional tornadoes, but we also see high winds, hailstorms, you know, things like that that can cause damage to your roof, which in turn will cause you to have to get your roof replaced. And I'm gonna say you're gonna see this happening more so in Texas than any other parts of the country. Another reason you may not wanna move to Fort Worth is due to the crime rating. You know, some parts of the city may be impacted by crime more than other parts of the city. You know, according to neighborhoodscout.com, Fort Worth's crime index is a 12, and that is on a scale of 100, with 100 being the safest. So Funky Town doesn't rank very well when it comes to crime. So just make sure you do your homework when it comes to finding that neighborhood that's gonna work for you and your family, you know, what's gonna work for you and your lifestyle. Every neighborhood isn't going to be the same, and there are pockets that, you know, possibly can be skewing the data. So just understanding which areas are better, and that's where me and my team can come into play. But we definitely want you to know the statistics when it comes to the crime. So another reason you may not want to move to Fort Worth is because of the dramatic rise in the population we've been experiencing. So according to the most recent US Census Bureau, Fort Worth is the 3rd fastest growing city in the nation. With an increase in the population of roughly 13,000 people between 2020 and 2021, Fort Worth's current population is about 935,000 people. So you may want to second guess yourself when you're thinking about making this move to Fort Worth if a rapidly growing city is not in the cards. And secondarily, all this growth could actually hurt the infrastructure of Fort Worth as a whole, especially if jobs aren't able to keep up with the growth, and recent experts have said it could very well be the case. So with an increased population, you're definitely looking at more drivers on the road, which leads to more traffic, which leads to more accidents, and so forth and so on. And that's another point that I want to bring up. When considering moving to Fort Worth, you know, you got to think about the traffic. Traffic has definitely increased over the years because of the population growth in Fort Worth. One of my least favorite interstates in the DFW is Interstate 35. You know, it runs north and south through Fort Worth, and I don't care if you travel north or south from downtown, you're going to run into congestion. You know, there's some toll roads and lanes at your disposal, but at certain times, even those lanes have delays. So basically, you're paying for a shorter delay as opposed to skipping traffic altogether. You know, the major roadways through the city are Interstate 20, Highway 183, 121, as well as Chisholm Trail Parkway, which is also a toll road. So there's a couple different routes that you can take, but just know that the traffic has increased over the years. The next reason you may not want to move to Fort Worth is because of the schools. Fort Worth ISD received a C rating from the Texas Education Agency, and of course, that's not the best rating I would want from a school district for my kids. According to the Texas Tribune, 70.6% of students were considered at risk of dropping out of school in Fort Worth ISD. You know, the schools have performed lower or below the surrounding districts in the suburbs. So that is another downfall of living in Cowtown. You know, you do have some alternative school options in Fort Worth. You know, you have charter schools as well as private schools, which, you know, many individuals who have kids do consider those options. But just take all this into consideration before you move down to Fort Worth. So if you love your sports and you like having your sports teams in your backyard, Fort Worth probably is not going to be the place for you. You know, we do have the Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Rangers that play games in Arlington. You know, the Mavericks are in downtown, the Dallas Stars play down there as well, but there's no professional sports teams in Fort Worth. You can catch a collegiate game over at TCU, who's usually always good, but other than that, you need to travel outside of the city for that type of entertainment. You know, you won't be able to take any public transportation from Fort Worth to Arlington or Dallas like you could if you lived in a city like New York or maybe Atlanta, where, you know, public transportation is connected to the other cities and suburbs. And if you're looking for more information about Fort Worth and the surrounding areas, go ahead and check out this video right here.